And we are officially live, Jason. Are you ready to rock?
Let's go.
Awesome. Welcome to all of our friends, IT professionals, MSP owners joining us today for a live conversation with Jason Murphy, who is head nerd at Enable. I already messed it up. Bad at
It's
words this
okay.
morning. Enable. Jason, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, it looks like we're going to be talking about driving more efficiency through automation and orchestration, which is a fancy term, but we can break that down later.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I see we have some folks already joining in. If you have comments while we're chatting, go ahead and drop them. I can pop them up here. If you're on Facebook, unfortunately, it just shows Facebook user, but somebody says, hey. Um,
Hey,
I, yeah, there it is. Chris Snyder saying hello all. I say we just get to it, Jason. Maybe first question. What is automation? Non-textbook definition.
yeah. I mean, before we get into what is automation, my role at Enable is primarily to demystify what is really technical into pseudo technical language so most people can understand it, right? I wouldn't put myself as a teacher, but I have been doing this for close to 25 years. So, and I'm self-taught. So I went to school for social work, for example. So it was one of those things that I kind of learned all of this technical stuff. Like when I had to manage Exchange once back in the day, I kind of learned that all by just reading articles for Microsoft. Let me Google that for you, as we used to say. Now, what
Yes,
is
totally.
automation, right? So, automation is really about tasks. When you want to do something to a device or do something up in the cloud, for example, you're going to set a command. It's a task, right? And then that task can maybe return information, it can install software, it can run a cleanup on your computer, it can do a lot of different things, but it is a task base, right? So, for example, one of the things I teach people to do in automation is conditionals, right? So when you're kind of fact finding within a Windows operating system, for example, you're going to look for certain characteristics. Is a certain registry key there? Is a file or folder there? Is a process running? And then based on what you find, you're going to then, it's called an if or if else or whereas, but from that you can logic and split your logic into workflow. And that's simply just a way to do tasks. Now, the other question I'm sure you're probably going to ask me is, what is orchestration, right? Now,
Naturally.
orchestration is much of the same as automation, but think of it when you program an application, right? Or when you're using complicated software, there's much more in dependencies. Yes, it may start with a task, but based on the result you get, you may want to do several different things, right? So it's much more, other than complicated, it is much more entrenched around objectives. For example, when you're looking at moving VMs from one host to another, whether it be Hyper-V or VMware. That is more orchestration. You're telling certain VMs to move based on, say, load balancing or various characteristics of the host. That is an orchestration exercise. So hopefully that'll kind of break it down for and contrast the two differences there.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think we can get into a few more examples as we go on. I do want to
For
take a
sure.
chance to show a comment from Navesh who asks, hey guys, will you guys also be talking about automation to deploy new laptops, etc.? Sorry if I'm approaching this from a basic perspective, pretty new to this. Maybe that's a good jumping point. If you could speak to that, Jason.
Yeah, and I actually prefer the Q&A method. It's something that makes it more interactive as well. So for anybody who is watching, if you have questions around automation or orchestration, obviously, please ask. Now to answer Navesh, are we going to be talking about automation to something like new laptops? We definitely can. Um, at Enable, one of my jobs is to work with our partner base and people who come to my boot camps around automation. And there are several things that I commonly get asked all of the time. The first one is, how do I get started? But two is, what can I do in automation? What are some things I can do to a laptop or a workstation or a server or something up in Microsoft Azure, for example? Well, there are several things you can do, and I kind of prepared a list. Now, one of the things I get asked all the time is, how do I deploy software? Right? Now, you would think deploying software is fairly easy. Well, when you're double clicking on an icon and there's a package to install, it makes it look easy. But when you're remotely trying to install a package into hundreds, if not thousands of machines remotely across your city, your state, the United States, wherever you are, or wherever your customers may be, well, then things get a little more complicated because you do want to standardize as an MSP or an IT department, right? You want to make sure all of your users are complying to the applications that should be installed. So what I do is I teach our partners to use Chocolatey, for example, which is a third-party tool that you can readily Google. And I show people how to use that. And it makes it very, very easy. And using some comma separated values within some keywords like VLC or Adobe or Chrome or Firefox or various other applications you'd want to get installed, we can now deploy applications very seamlessly through an RMM, for example, like our Incentral product. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Now, when you're talking automation to deploy the laptop, that is much more in terms of orchestration. That's where you start getting into software. There are some free tools online. I don't want to, necessarily plug some, but there are some PowerShell scripts that you can readily Google from GitHub that allow you to actually remotely deploy laptops as well. So you may want to even start there.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's great to mention some of those products and maybe tooling around some of this. I've personally used Chocolatey, awesome piece of software. I'm not affiliated, but chocolatey.org, folks want to check that out. But
Right.
Jason, maybe we could dive a little deeper, make it more concrete for folks when we want to do automation. Like what tools are we using? Is this just simply PowerShell scripts, or what's the kind of extent of what can be used?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously I work at Enable, so a lot of our partners, the majority of our partners are managed service providers. So these are companies or IT providers that have customers within their city, for example, or their state. And they're trying to remotely manage the IT environments without having kind of to, walk in and knock on the door and go into the IT closet. So when you're trying to manage those devices remotely, you typically start it with what is called an RMM, right? So your RMM is really the vehicle that allows you to manage devices remotely. It comes with remote control. It comes with the ability to deploy automation, for example, allows you to do patch orchestration, for example. So there's a lot of orchestration that goes on with RMM platforms. Now, in terms of automation, like for example, our Incentral product allows you to take PowerShell or Windows commands, for example, and it allows you to seamlessly through the background, because there's agents installed in all of those laptops or workstations or Macs or Linux devices, and allows you to script against them. Now, primarily in a Windows environment, that is going to be something like PowerShell. It doesn't have to be, but I'm much more familiar with PowerShell than other coding languages. So we're going to kind of probably talk about PowerShell today. But PowerShell allows you, the IT administrator, to, through cross-platform, because you can run PowerShell on Mac and Linux as well, but allows you to run the automation you need. Now, I teach our partners, and in fact, our boot camps are readily available for free. So you can actually, even if you're not a partner, hop into, for example, our PowerShell intro bootcamp, like so PowerShell for beginners. And that allows people and IT administrators to get the foundational aspects of PowerShell so that they can utilize that within the RMM platform itself.
I had
Hopefully
to
that
reach
makes
for
sense.
the microphone. Yeah, I think that totally does. And I'm actually less familiar with PowerShell. I've written a few scripts here and there. I'm
You're a
more,
Python guy, aren't you?
I am a Python guy, Python
I
and
knew it.
Bash till the end. Yes.
Right.
Which I think is mostly just a difference between, which like A, what you prefer, and B, maybe operating system. I think Python's a little more common on
Well, I
Linux.
do follow you on
Um,
Twitter, so I kind of already knew that you were a Python guy,
yes,
and you dabble in various other languages other than PowerShell. I kind of grew up in like obviously seasoned IT administrator. You're looking after Windows environments. So when I first learned, it was in Visual Basic Code, right? So VBS, right?
yeah,
So that's how I kind of started. Now, it took me a long time to learn PowerShell. The reason being is as I got older, I felt like, oh, VBS, I already know how to use that. I don't really need another language. Well, I didn't really understand how easy an object oriented PowerShell really was. So learning that actually became much easier when I actually started trying to apply it. And I can tell you, um, if I can learn it, geez, anybody can. But it's one of those things that it became a big game changer in my career as well. When I first started at Enable, I was a sales engineer and I was doing demonstrations of a software product. But PowerShell really allowed me to, pardon me, help our partners do much more in terms of management of their IT environments. So it really kind of game changed how I started out at Enable and how I kind of grew as I kind of grew in my career. So it was a really important step.
for sure. And we've talked about some of this tooling and as well the PowerShell intro session that Enable puts on. But what are some other ways that folks can, I guess, get started? So we know about the tooling
Mhm.
and we know some resources, but I'm curious, is it good to just like define a task and go for it, or is there a more like formal way to learn? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how you learn, right? And as somebody who teaches kind of the advanced concepts of RMM, or whether I'm teaching the basics of PowerShell, there are starting points, and it really kind of starts with you because we as humans we don't all learn the same way. Some people can watch a YouTube video and just retain it and go. Other people need to read, right? Or people need instruction, like what I do with my boot camps. Much more interactive. Like, yes, you can read or you can watch the video, but you need to be able to ask questions when you get stumped or what have you. So, a lot of our partners come to our boot camps, for example, to be able to learn interactively. And that seems to be kind of work for most people, not all people. People ask me all the time, I'm busy, for example, I won't be able to attend your boot camp. Can I watch a video? Absolutely. So all my boot camps are recorded and we put it into what is called the MSP Institute, soon to be Enable University, or in what we call Enable U. And all of my content kind of gets posted there. Now, based on how you learn is kind of the first step, but when you want to learn, there's several things you can do in terms of just learning code, for example. When I wanted to learn PowerShell, there was something called CBT Nuggets. Now we're going way back, right? And I'm sure, and I know CBT Nuggets are still kicking around, but YouTube is an immense resource for learning code. There are probably millions of videos just on PowerShell on YouTube. Um, PowerShell in a month of lunches is another big one. So that's probably the go-to standard in terms of learning PowerShell. Now there's YouTube videos, but there's also a book as well. So both kind of help. Now I learned through videos and just osmosis. Like I'm there kind of coding live while they're kind of demonstrating it, and that's how it kind of worked for me. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for everybody. So you really need to kind of find your niche and kind of apply for it. And again, if you need something instructor led, that's where you can obviously come to a boot camp.
For sure. I love that note about learning styles. That's something I definitely encountered. I think like two kind of learning styles. One is like just reading a book,
Mhm.
like a physical book rather than an ebook. I think it's really difficult sometimes to read like PDFs. And then, yeah, I alluded to this earlier, but having some kind of goal or set point on like, hey, I want to do this, and then just like bashing through Google to figure it out.
Well, think of it
Um,
like this, Stetson. It's like the Amazon effect, right? When you want to consume knowledge, when you want to learn, all of us, I mean, unless you've got a PhD or you've got some kind of amazing memory where you can read a book and just retain, the masses, for example, need like the McDonald's version of learning, right? Like what you need bite-sized, quick pieces just to digest and kind of move on. That's how I learn, right? So it's kind of like the Amazon effect of shopping, right? In terms of learning, something that's consumable, something that's bite-sized, something that's easy, something that's sometimes interactive. That's why our boot camps are really, really popular as well, is because you don't have to learn by yourself. You can actually learn along with me, for example, or one of my colleagues. I should probably talk about the other 7 head nerds. But it's one of those things where primarily either myself, Marc Andre, or Paul Kelly specialize in PowerShell code. So one of us can actually show you those fundamentals and kind of take you through it, because you might be scratching your head at some point, or I might be explaining something too quickly. So it's one of those things that interactive learning is what we find that hits kind of the home run for most people.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great way to approach it. Um,
Mhm.
Getting again a little deeper, Jason, I'm curious how can IT professionals and MSPs today maybe start to analyze what needs automated? Is it just kind of like pick a random task, or does it get a little more analytical?
No, it's probably the number one question around automation that I get. So I'm glad you asked it, because you know, we didn't pre-plan any of this. So it's one of those things that when we can start anywhere, we have to start with, how do I automate? Where do I start? So that is primary. And I go to IT conferences all the time. I meet with our partners. I go to their sites, or I hop on calls with them. And I get that question all the time. Where do I start? And it's one of those things where I always tell people to look to their IT service management platform or the professional services automation platform, because that is where your customers are logging their tickets. And that should be really a foundational area of where to start. Like, where are my problems? Well, if you're going to start automating, you need to start looking for themes, right? Um, for example, I had a customer, for example, they were an automotive consortium in the province that I'm living in, and their finance team was logging tickets like crazy. So it was one of those things that I quickly realized that this small little department of like 10 or 15 people were logging, 60, 70% of the tickets for that organization. So I knew something was really, really off. So I started doing deeper dives. I started looking at ticket histories for that customer, and they were one of our biggest customers. They were paying us close to $30,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue. So I knew I had to do something, because I was almost like a churn risk. So I started looking at their tickets, and I started looking at their ERP platform at the time was QuickBooks Server. It was kind of out of date. It was on legacy hardware. Servers and processes were stopping. Backups weren't working. So I really started developing some automation to really do the checks and balances that I needed to, or what my organization needed to be able to keep that system up and running all of the time. Now, I don't see you right now, Stetson. So if you are there, hopefully you can chime in, because I think I did lose you. But we'll continue on. So when I started off looking for things to do, I actually, realized that my IT service management platform, or my PSA, had all of the information that I needed to be able to. Good, you're back. Um,
I apologize, Jason. My connection completely like something happened.
no worries, no worries. I was still live, so I kept on going.
Awesome.
Um,
Automation saves us.
so it was one of those things where when I started fact finding through my PSA at that time, or my IT service management platform, I started fact finding, and that's really where it started. Now, What I also did, along with my colleagues, was we developed 15 things that you can and should automate. So tying it back to Ravesh's question earlier is like, what should I automate on my laptop? For example, we actually built 15 or 45 things that you can and should automate. And these are 3 little bite-sized boot camps that last about 45 minutes to an hour. And I kind of just go through one by one in terms of how I built it, why I built it. Here's the logic of how to use it. Because yes, these are good templates, but you may have to make them your own. So you may have to tweak them and use them differently. And again, most of this is all based in PowerShell. Not all of it. Some of it is based in our Central Automation Manager product. So there's 2 ways that you can use scripting at Enable. So you can either use an automation builder. So it's a no code, low code automation builder where you can drag and drop PowerShell policies together to kind of get an output and actually script against the device. But the other way is to actually PowerShell. And there is what we call the Enable Cookbook that is readily accessible on the internet. And you can go there to success.n-able.com/cookbooks. And that is where all of my PowerShell, and there's over 800 automation policies and PowerShell scripts readily available for the public to use. Okay, so feel free to check that out. And again, if you just click on the filter for PowerShell, it's basically a PowerShell cookbook. So there's like close to, I think, 200, 250 there. So just in PowerShell where you can kind of get at them. So
awesome. I dropped a link to that below in the video and also in the comments
right there.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right there.
I love it when people do that. So yeah, that's where all the scripting is. So, and again, if you are a partner of Enable, you can actually log into the MSP Institute and watch the videos. So I can kind of take you through, the 15 or 45 things, because I did 3 of them. So I believe it's called 15 things you can and should automate. There's actually 15 more things, and then I forget what I named the third one, but there's 45 things you can and should automate. So it's really, really helpful. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback about these boot camps because it really narrows down what I see from our partners or what I've been requested from our MSP or IT departments across the globe, right? Like pushing Chrome extensions, like just these little automation policies that you're like, yeah, I have to Google and then I have to tweak it. I make them reusable. So in the scripting, I create variables where you can kind of just rename things and change particular variables so it makes it kind of reusable for the next time.
Awesome. And that's something I don't think I knew that you could do, is push out Chrome extensions and kind of in mass. And I'm looking through, I put some links as well to the 15 more things session. Just reading through a bit, I see, to give folks an idea, monitoring changes of specific metrics like admin accounts, disk usage, I'm sure probably CPU and RAM, things like that. Enabling
well, let me just stop you there.
The
one that you just said around emit accounts, like there's local admin, but there's also, like, for example, domain admin. So when you have a policy that can reinforce your security posture so that as the MSP, only maybe you have a MSP admin, or maybe you have a particular domain admin that you use, for example, or maybe there's particular colleagues in yourself that are added to a particular group. If that then changes, then we fire off an alarm, you get a ticket. It's now security. So automation isn't just kind of like enhancement. Like there's 3 different types of automation that I teach our partners about. All right. So you've got reactive automation. Something's broke, I need to fix it. Then you've got proactive automation where you want to, for example, clean up a system, right? But also there's security automation out there as well. So, and that's really about compliancy, certain checks and balances that you need to do as an IT admin to ensure that, for example, you're not getting breached, right? Because the first thing I would go after if I was a hacker is something like domain admin or local admin, so that I can, then spread, some kind of nefarious software laterally across through the environment.
Yeah, and I love those three bullet points you mentioned, Jason, as a way to kind of think about what types of automation there are. Again, a reactive, proactive, and security automation.
And there is one more, and it's more like reporting, right?
Sure, that's something
Um,
I wanted to ask about. Is like generating spreadsheets. Please
you know
talk
what?
more.
Honestly, I would say that's probably because a lot of people get task-based automation. Like if I want to restart a service or if I want to install a software, once you learn it, you kind of under you have it and you move on. The thing about fact finding is you have to be able to report, you have to be able to pull information out of systems en masse. And people want to be able to kind of export to or output to a CSV, for example, so I can get, when I have when I'm managing 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 devices, I need to be able to see things in large groups, right? I need to be able to create pivot tables, right, or be able to filter on the data or what have you. So I teach our partners to be able to do that through our RMM, right? Because all of the data is there, all of the asset information is there. It's all housed within the and central platform. So being able to pull that information out is near and dear to any MSP. And again, through, for example, N-Central has a PowerShell provider that makes scripting and automation much, much easier. So it's one of those things that I teach people how to use this PowerShell, but also be able to pull asset metadata out of N-Central or other reporting outputs from the RMM as well.
Yeah, that is extremely powerful. I've worked in many organizations where I've been, tasked with generating the reports and kind of again outputting to CSV. So definitely a tedious process if you're not automating that. But one question or area maybe we could dive into, Jason,
Mhm.
is this concept of like who watches the watchers or who monitors the monitor. I'm not sure the exact phrase. My
Listen, I
question
get
is,
it.
yeah, your automation fails. How do you get insight into that or monitor that process?
And that's a really great question. And it's always one of the challenges because sometimes no two devices are the same, or at least one out of 99 is somehow different, right? Or, Microsoft has made a particular change in a particular build of Windows. Today it runs and tomorrow it doesn't. These are the things that kind of we get into what is called technology sprawl. And it does happen. You can throw automation at devices all day, every day. And unless your IT organization has like a DevOps admin that's like their full time job, oftentimes it's like you're playing automation whack a mole, right? You're kind of, yeah, it works today, but now I've got to chase my tail and figure out the problem that's over there with the automation. And that is just sometimes the nature of coding, right? Now, unless you're getting it like in DevOps, if you can get into you know, agile development methods, sure. You've got the time and you can actually verify that automation is working and doing exactly what you need it to. But there is some, especially within an RMM, there is visibility into being able to see if your automation is working or not. And that is always in program we call it try catch, or at least in PowerShell we call it try catch, because you want to be able to give yourself certain keywords or outputs of the automation to ensure that your automation is doing what you intended to do, right? Is software installed? And then you give yourself either a yes or a no, basically. You can create different, string values, but at the end of the day, it needs to tell you if the software is there or if it's not. And that's really, what I call coding best practices. And that is just something that you're iterating on as you get more and more familiar with coding.
Yeah, for sure. I love that concept of the try catch, or I think Python does like a try except, but definitely pretty ubiquitous.
And sometimes they are equally transferable. Like there's a lot of people like Mark Andre, for example, can write Python. So he can actually understand both. I've never actually gone as far as learning Python because I feel like for all intents and purposes, I can kind of stay fairly comfortable in PowerShell. So a lot of the times, if you have a background in Python, you're going to be able to learn PowerShell. Or if you have a PowerShell background, you're going to be able to learn Python. So a lot of the programming fundamentals are equally transferable.
Totally love it. And the focus of this conversation has been largely automation, but should we get a little deeper into orchestration, Jason?
Sure.
Yeah.
Orchestration's a little more complicated
Yeah.
because you typically want software to do your orchestration for you, right? You can write, if you can obviously write C sharp, for example, you're going to write a program that does your orchestration for you. So orchestration is a really big and powerful piece of automation. For example, I used to use a platform called ServiceNow. I'm sure you've heard of it. They're one of the larger entities on the stock market, for example. Um, but it's able to provision your VMs for you, right? All you really need to do is put in some, values, some keywords, sizing of your VMs, and all you do is really click submit, and it actually goes ahead and provisions that VM for you. But there's a number of things in terms of the orchestration that's happening in the background, talking to Microsoft Hyper-V or into VMware. There's a lot of orchestration routines that happen. So, as much as I'd like to kind of get into orchestration, it's such a huge piece, and that's really where the orchestration around programming really comes in. You really need to start with automation to get into the orchestration. And not to say you can't orchestrate with PowerShell or Python or various other languages, because you definitely can. In fact, when you start getting into, I would say, more advanced concepts, you're actually going to be doing a lot of automation in orchestration because that's just the general workflow. So these are much more, I would just say, advanced concepts within coding or automation.
Yeah, awesome. I'm kind of curious, Jason. How could a IT department or MSP maybe determine, I guess, how much of a gain they're getting from automation, and maybe how much time to dedicate to that?
Equally good questions that I get quite often. Usually it's how to get started, but it's also, well, how do I need to hire for this? You know, a business owner will ask me that. Or how much time should I be devoting to automation? Well, I'd have to know your business to kind of give a finite answer. But when I talk to business owners or service delivery managers or the people who are controlling the technology within the organization, um, I kind of try to relate to what you're trying to accomplish. As an MSP, most of the money that you're spending in your operation is on labor, right? So how do you reduce your labor costs? Automation. Now, to me, it's a 1 + 1 = 2, right? And to a business owner, you can probably see the value of automation very quickly if I can start reducing their labor costs and increase their profitability, right? So a business owner kind of just automatically gets it. Automation is my best friend. Now they want to typically, have a person at least part-time to start with doing automation for them. So if you've got a person internally who can code PowerShell, that could be their part-time job, just doing that half the time, creating automation for you. The other part is when you're a business owner and obviously you can hire a resource who can full-time do automation for you. That is going to pay immense dividends, right? Because then you can start getting into more planning, more research, problem management. What are the problems my customers are having? This is something that I was talking about when you dropped a little bit earlier. It's one of those things where you have to be able to um, you fact find. That's where it all starts. Okay, so that's an important one. Now you need to ask a question because I need to grab my battery from my laptop, really, or my plug.
Yeah,
Sorry
no
about
worries,
this.
Jason. Let's
Of
go
course,
for
I
it.
forgot to plug it in.
That's right. This is actually live. Everybody gets, the full live stream with warts and all, me jumping out, and what other technical issues we have.
Of course.
Jason, I think I'd almost be a little reckless if, on mentioning automation, we didn't bring up AI. Um,
Ah,
and,
perfect segue.
right. Yeah. It's like the buzzword of the moment. Can we talk about that a little bit? What are you seeing right now?
Well, you know what? Buzzword or not, I mean, what was it? February. Actually, it was probably around December when I started kind of hopping into at least reading about. I probably didn't get into Chat GBT until probably March of this year. Um, and obviously, Chat GBT has been that's the buzzword that's been out there because it's readily
Yes.
accessible. Anybody can log in with their Facebook or Google account. You can really ask it anything, and it will tell you what you want to hear often. And I'll be honest with you, because I am self-taught, I actually have a lot of sloppy practices around how I code.
Me too.
Um, well, it's one of those things where I am self-taught, so I've kind of piecemealed my scripting into a certain style. It's just like when we talk about language, coding is a language. It's kind of a format, and I've taken that format and kind of made it the way I need to in terms of how I learn. ChatGPT has no limits. So I don't care how you code or how well you think you code, ChatGPT will actually improve how you're coding. And actually, you can start learning from Chat. And I already have. Um, for example, I write a lot of PowerShell in PowerShell 5.1, and I'll have partners go, okay, but our environment over here is in PowerShell 7. Can you update your script to reflect that? I'll be like, hey, ChatGPT, can you format this? Honestly, I'm not even lying to you. You can
Yeah,
actually
I believe
take
it.
older code and have it update to a more modern standard. So I could do that myself, but then I have to start looking at all the different objects that are in PowerShell, and looking at different changes. ChatGPT can do that in 3 seconds. Like, it is amazing. Now, that being said, what is happening in the market today is, because I work for an RMM vendor that does business with IT departments and MSPs across the globe, is that we have recognized that we need to do more with AI. So I can tell you, Enable is on the forefront of doing more in AI. Obviously, can't get into specifics. We are a publicly traded company, but it's one of those things where that's all the kind of foundational research that we're doing right now. We need to do more and more about making AI um, easier for business owners, for technicians, so that they can do more and do things faster. Because if I can make things easier in my platform for you, the technician or the business owner or the IT leader, that's going to pay dividends over time.
Yeah, totally. I think it's super interesting because there's like this base layer of, okay, let's create some automation, some scripting to, or even orchestration to deploy new machines, pull reports, whatever it may be. But then I think AI just, or Chat GPT just takes it to the next level. I personally use it every day. I think there'd be some really awesome gains for folks to, perhaps go through some of these, PowerShell scripts and things, the cookbooks that we linked earlier, and even just paste those into ChatGPT and say, explain this block of code. I've done that a ton, and it's really good at like that kind of reasoning about what each line of code does.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because when I code, I don't always comment out my code. I kind of know in my head
Sure.
the script does this, and I'm sure you've seen this on GitHub or what have you. Pardon me. Let me just have a quick sip here.
Yeah, go for it.
Is that a lot of people who write code don't really comment out their code. ChatGPT, you take your code and it just literally tells you line by line exactly what it's doing. That is such a powerful piece, especially if you ever want to go from A to B in terms of your own learning curve, right? I know it's really helped me as well. Now, I don't get to play with ChatGPT every day, but in terms of the usage I have done, it has it has been monumental. Now, I can tell you right now, ChatGPT is really only as good as either the code you supply or the questions you ask it. That is not always going to be the case, right? It's going to start asking you questions back. right?
For sure.
Because I don't like, just cursory. When I hopped in there, I started wanting to, create API scripting. Some very, very complicated stuff that I've learned over, I would say, the past 2 years, 2.5 years at Enable, since I've come back to Enable. So it's one of those things where I've played a lot with our API. And when I started supplying it API code, um, it started doing some very powerful things. And I was highly impressed at how advanced it is. But I realized quickly that it wasn't always formatting things correctly, or it wasn't writing it the way I wanted to, because I didn't really ask it the right question either, or I didn't supply it the right information either. So right now, that's how it is. But eventually, you know, because ChatGPT is a point in time in terms of its modal, I think, or its data set, right?
Yeah, yeah, it always
Eventually,
says as of September 2021. I don't.
right? ChatGPT 10 could be live, right? Where it's, you know, fully accessible to the internet and everything else. So who knows? I mean, it's a really exciting time, or maybe even a
Yeah,
little scary as well. So
definitely a mix of both. I share
yes,
that sentiment.
but let's be honest. I mean, somebody is going to be the next Uber, right? Or somebody's going to be the next Twitter or Facebook because of AI. It's the natural progression in technology right now.
Yeah, totally. It'll be, yeah, super interesting to see where it goes. We're coming up on just around 45 minutes here. Jason, is there any other areas that we missed that we should get deeper on or that you'd like to cover?
Um, Let me see here. I did take a few notes. Obviously, in terms of, interacting with myself, obviously I do podcasts, with you, Stetson, of course. But you can always find me online. I manage our Enable Reddit page. So if you want to find me, you head on over to r/enable. I'm the ncentral_nerd. So that's my handle there. But it's one of those things that if you're going to get started as a tech in PowerShell, again, YouTube, come to a boot camp. At least get that foundational starting, right? Because that's how you level up as a technician. So it's not just leveling up as or becoming an efficient MSP. You want to also grow as a technician. One, you become a L2 or an L3, for example, but also you make more money. So, do it for yourself. Um, but the other part is, as an MSP owner, because there is a group of you out there who are MSP owners as well, is that you have to be able to allow your technicians to learn, to grow. And I've worked for one of the biggest MSPs on the planet. I would say I was also afforded the time to be able to get to that next level, and that is how I was able to impact that business. So being able to do that as a takeaway, to start out part time, to give someone 10 hours a week or a part time job in automation is an immense step forward for your business.
Yeah, love it. I'll echo that same sentiment. That automation is amazing, whether you're a career person, business owner, whatever. Hopefully, we've given folks some incentive and convincing before AI comes and ruins society, or I guess blasts us off into utopia. But with that, Jason, this has been extremely helpful. We've got a pile of links for folks in the comments. We'll be sending out in the Facebook group and in the newsletter as well on where you can find there's tons of awesome resources for getting started with automation, PowerShell. Jason mentioned you can find him at Reddit's r/enable. And where else can we reach out to you, Jason, if we have questions about automation?
Sure. My email is letter J, MURPHY at able.com. Or you can go to LinkedIn and put in Central Nerd, and you can find me there as well. Most of my handles are in Central Nerd. Hey, it's what I do. But
Yeah.
Stetson, I want to thank you for having me as well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Jason, have a good afternoon. And we'll be doing these monthly. So check in again, drop your questions in the comments. I'm sure Jason would be happy to answer them. All right. We'll see you.